Hi, welcome back for another Tool Time Tuesday. I'm Melissa Muir. This is project number 4, part 1 out of the Revere Professional Jewelry Making series. Now, a couple things that I want to point out in all of the projects that are going to be in this particular series. I've had the great privilege of working very closely with Revere on this series, and a couple of things that we talked a little bit about was how to present the videos and the different projects. Now, keep in mind, for every project that is in this book, there's probably about 5 or 6 different ways to accomplish these tasks. However, the book was written for a very specific way of techniques and learning those techniques. It is a very traditional European metalsmithing, and so as we've discussed and talked about the different techniques in the book and ways to accomplish the various tasks, we've decided that we are going to stick very closely to the way the books or the projects are presented in this book. And this is not necessarily to kind of hinder you from accomplishing tasks, but rather there's been a lot of thought put into the book and the way that things have been done traditionally. This is not a book of completed projects, but more of learning the techniques and learning the skill. And once you have this skill and you've learned the techniques, then you can start to alter them and modify them so that they suit your own need or way of working. So with that said, this particular project, we are going to be making 2 different styles of chain. However, they start the same way. Now, this is not going to be a completed bracelet. The scope of the project does not include making a clasp or a hook. However, if you make your chain long enough, you are certainly more than welcome to take it to that point. And further along in the book, there are a couple of projects that discuss that and would be suitable for this particular project, and we will get to those eventually. So with that said, another thing that I want to point out is how important it is to be accurate with your measurement. So having some kind of a caliper, a slide scale, a gauge is going to be essential, because we actually need to point or to do our measurement out at least 1 decimal point. So we need to go out to that level so that we make certain we are accurate. And this project, it is very important that you are very accurate on your measurement, or the chain just will not work. So with all of that said, let's jump in and get started now. What I want to do is create a coil of wire that is done in an oval. So I don't want a round, and this is going to pose a couple of different situations that I need to work through or work around. Now in the book, Alan shows how to create a mandrel that you can wrap your wire around using a rolling mill. In addition to that, he starts with a larger gauge wire and pulls it down so that it is about 2.3 millimeters or approximately 11 gauge. Now, not everybody has that, and we understand that. When this book was written 30 years ago, he never dreamed that it would be taught in the capacity that it's being taught. My YouTube channel is one of those instances. All of a sudden, we have access to thousands of people whose skill levels are all over the place. Now, having said that, Alan did actually come up with an alternate method of creating a mandrel for this. So if you happen to have a rolling mill, by all means, follow the directions that are in there, but I'm going to show you a different method of creating an oval mandrel that's probably a little bit more accessible for those of you who do not have a rolling mill. So what I'm going to start with here is some welding rod. Now, welding rod can be picked up at a welding store. I didn't make it over to my welding store, but I did make it over to my Home Depot. And the welding rod that I bought there was very different from what you actually need. So I got to do this project multiple times. I did finally go over to a Harbor Freight and was able to buy welding rod there. However, in doing so, I had to buy a quantity of them. I'm pretty sure I have welding rod for the rest of my life. So be aware of that. I do understand that you can go to a welding store and buy 1 welding rod or 2 or however many you need. So if you're near one, you have access to that, maybe that's a way that you can look. So what I'm going to do is I need to measure this welding rod. We are looking for specific measurements on this. So like I said, having a slide caliper or some kind of a gauge is of utmost importance. So in this case, it's not an expensive one, but it is fairly accurate. And what I want to do is I'm going to zero out. I just make sure I close everything down, zero this out, and I want to check the size of my welding rod, and I'm after something that is close to 2.3. So if it's 2.29 or 2.34, as in this case, that's totally fine. That's acceptable. So we're after a 2.3 measurement here. And I want to make certain that my second piece is that as well. So again, 2.34. So what I've done is I've taken one large welding rod and I've cut it down into 6-inch pieces. And this is what is going to become our mandrel. Now, by doing this, if we check our measurement here on the side, this is going to give us about a 4.7, and this shows me 4.73, and again, that is totally an acceptable measurement, so we are good with that. The next thing I need to do is bind this together, and to do this, I just use a little bit of painter's tape. Now, you can use whatever method you'd like. If this is something that you think you're going to do quite a bit of, maybe you want to weld this together. Maybe you want to solder it. But the tape method is going to work for me for right now. And I just need to do just about the last 10 millimeters of it. Whatever you do, just make certain that they're tight all the way along. Now, when you create a coil, you are going to have some natural spring back of that material. And because of this, there are a couple things that we would highly suggest you do in this project. Use either copper or fine silver. Anything like gold or sterling silver is going to be extremely difficult, at least for the first time that you're trying this. So I highly suggest you get some fine silver or you get some copper to do the project at least the first 1 or 2 times till you kind of get your hands dirty and you get a feel for the way the metal moves and reacts. Now, with that spring back, what happens when you are on a round mandrel, you'll notice that your rings open up ever so slightly and they're very easy to pull off of your mandrel. But when you have a mandrel that is a shape, whether it's a rectangle, an oval, a square, a triangle, whatever, that spring back is going to kind of create more of a helix motion, and it's actually going to hold tighter to your mandrel, which makes it extremely difficult to pull off of your mandrel. So we thought about this ahead of time, and the solution is to wrap this particular mandrel in a little piece of paper. Now, I just took my paper, it's a 15 millimeters, it's a little scrap paper, I just found something, 15 millimeters wide, and what I'm going to do is to secure this onto my mandrel, but I don't want to go just straight on it. I'm actually going to take this at an angle. So I want to begin to wrap this, and then I'm going to take some tape and just kind of secure it. Now again, having the correct measurement is of utmost importance here. So you want to make certain that you wrap this very tightly so that we don't change the dimensions of our mandrel too much. So you'll notice that we're just working, I'm kind of, as I twist this, my thumb just pushes this around, keeping this all nice and tight. All right, and now we are down here at the end. I'll use another little piece of tape and secure that. So the measurements that I'm after on this are going to be about a 2.6 to 2.7 by about a 4.9, somewhere in there. And that's going to give me a nice oval. And that's what we need to start with. And I'm very happy with this. And what you want to do is just test multiple parts of your mandrel. Make sure that you are consistent on this. So I got 2.6, 2.56, well, 2.58. That's pretty good. So we are fairly consistent on this, and I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. Now the next thing we need to do is to get our wire and wrap it around the mandrel. So here I have my wire. Once again, I'm going to check my wire. I want it to be about the same thickness or close to as that mandrel. Now, 2.26. Remember our mandrel was 2.3, that this is perfect. We want our mandrel to be ever so slightly thicker than what our wire is. So 2.65, which is approximately 2.7, perfect. And that is what we want to have. So the next thing I need to do is figure out a way to get my wire wrapped very tightly around this mandrel. Now, in his book, Alan uses a hand vise. I don't happen to have a hand vise, but I do happen to have a pair of vise grips. Now, when using vise grips, there can be a little bit of a learning curve on them as far as how to use them. So let me really show you quickly how I use mine. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pair of pliers to create kind of an L shape here at the end of this wire. And what this is going to do is allow me to lay this across my mandrel here and secure it to that. Now when using a hand vise, the proper way to do this and get that setting just right, I'm going to kind of open this up so you see when it's closed, it doesn't close entirely. And what I want to do is close it until it meets the two items that I am putting together. So in this case, my wire and my mandrel. Now here it is, and I've got it just where it barely holds it together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to twist this knob until there's a little bit of resistance here, which is where I'm at this point. I'm going to press this lever to open it back up, and now I want to give a half a turn, and that is going to give me enough pressure to hold everything together. So once again, I'll hold this, and these vise grips are a little bit hard for me. My hands are a little small for it, but I think we are good. Make sure that you've got everything in here secured pretty well. So you want to try to get it centered as much as possible. And I'm going to clip that down. And now everything is nice and secure, and we are ready to go over to the vise to wrap this. So now that I'm here at my vise, what I'm going to do is secure the end of my wire into the vise itself. Make sure it's good and tight in there because we are going to be applying a lot of force on this. And what I want to do is I'm going to pull very tight towards me here, and I'm going to wrap towards the mandrel, making certain that each of these wires lay perfectly right next to the one next to it so that we create a nice tight coil. And this is definitely going to take a bit of effort. If you're not pulling hard and you're not getting kind of a little bit of a workout, you're probably not doing it right. This is a very thick wire, and so as you do this, it is going to harden quite quickly, but just keep working it. And always pulling really tight. Notice that I keep my hands really close to where this wire is going. That helps me to guide and keep these wires right next to each other. If you happen to have openings, a little bit of that can be corrected when we anneal this. However, you do change the size of the ring when that happens. So do your best to work slowly and tightly, and you should do well. To make certain that this is going properly, I highly suggest occasionally you come in and take a measurement. We are after about 9.2, and I'm perfect right there, 9.19, 9.23 by, I believe, 7.8 is what we are after, and that is right where I'm at, 7.8, 7.9 by 9.2, and we are spot on. So that is making me very happy. And there's our coil. I'm going to release my vice grips and release the vise. And now we are ready to remove this coil from our mandrel. But right now, remember I told you a little bit about that spring back and the fact that we've wrapped this so tightly, it does not want to come off. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to remove this from the coil. But what I'm going to do first is remove this tape, because if I don't, it actually leaves kind of a sticky mess. So I'll remove as much of it as I can. And up here at the top, I may not be able to actually get it. I think I've wrapped too tight around it. So I'll just have to deal with that later. All right, the next thing I need to do is anneal this, and then I can remove it easily because the paper will burn off. And there'll be a couple of things that I'm looking for, and I'll point that out as we go. For this section, I'm just using a larger butane torch. It's got a nice big bushy flame on it and allows me to heat up larger pieces of metal. So I'll just burn this paper and begin to warm up my coil. This is a lot of material. We're using 2.3 millimeter wire, which is approximately 11 gauge. So don't worry if it takes a little longer than what you're used to. I'm starting to finally see this color change that I'm after, and that indicates to me that the wire is being annealed. So we're not quite there yet. I'm looking for this to go a little bit darker. Now we're really getting close. You see how right now it's kind of dark, and when I take my torch over it, it almost looks like bright, clean copper again. And that tells me that I'm at the annealing temperature. Now I'm going to flip this over and do the other side as well, just to make certain that it is fully annealed. And that looks really good to me. I'm happy with that. So next we're going to put it into our quench. Because it is so thick and we have so much of it, it will take a little longer to quench. Submerge the entire thing. So next we want to pull our mandrels out. So pull it out of the water, and you should be able to slip your mandrels off. And what we have now is there's probably still some paper inside of this. So I'm just going to use one of these welding rods to help me push it all out. And now if we look at our coil here, it should have a really nice oval profile to that. So I'm going to put this into the pickle, let it really get cleaned up, and then I'll either use a Scotch-Brite or a brass brush to do the edges or the outside edges of this, and that way then I'll have a nice uniform finish when it comes time to create my rings. Now that we have our coil, it is time to cut the rings. And there is a right way and a wrong way to do this, as I found out the hard way. So I'm going to show you guys the right way. Instead of cutting the rings here along the side, you want to cut the rings down its spine, so kind of at that peak. Now, one of those things that I talked about before was that spring back. And what you want to do is make certain that you have a guide so that you're cutting down along that same line all the way through all of these rings. And what that's going to do is make certain that your rings are all at least the uniform size. So after taking all of your measurements, make sure again that you are at the proper size for our rings. And again, if I look here along the side, I'm at about 9.3, about 9.28, and a 7.8, 7.75, okay, 9.26. So I'm pretty happy with the measurements that I'm seeing. Everything is fairly uniform. Now, because of that spring back, sometimes it tends to do that little bit of a helix motion. So what I'm going to do is just take my Sharpie and put a mark right in the midpoint, or kind of that point of the jump ring at the top, and again down here at the bottom. And I'm going to just create a line and connect those two. And this is really nice because as you're sawing, I mean, we're working with an annealed piece of metal here, so things tend to shift sometimes. And what this is going to do is give us a guide. If things happen to shift or move, we'll still know where to cut these rings. And if I've done this right, they should meet up, and there they go. So now we have that guide for us to cut along. This little piece right here is going to be in my way, so I'm going to cut that out, just so it's not so much of a nuisance to me. Whoops, hold on to that. And now we're ready to go. To do this properly, you want to work here at your bench pin. And to be ergonomically appropriate, you want your bench pin to be about chest high. So I want to be able to put my arms up like this, and it's going to not be like super uncomfortable. Like this would be fairly comfortable for me. I'm not hunched over, I'm not looking up or at an awkward angle. So it's important that you get your bench pin at that right height. And for me, about chest high is appropriate because I can easily see what it is that I'm going to be doing. Now with my bench pin, I've altered this a little bit. Do not be afraid to alter your tools so that they work for you, especially your bench pins. So on this, there were multiple peaks that were out here and it just didn't work for me. So I took a flat file and I filed it pretty blunt. And then from there, I took a round file and created a round groove in here, and then I further refined that with a little wider half round file. In addition to that, I filed on the underside of this bench pin just because it was a little bit sharp and it was not comfortable to hold these rings. So do whatever you need to do to make your tools work best for you and make them so they're comfortable. I've got a saw blade in here. This is a 3/0. Now when you pick which saw blade you are going to do, you want to check this, and you want to have about 2.5 to 3 teeth per the thickness of the material you are cutting. And because we're working with something so thick, this is about right. So if I look at this, I can easily see that there are 3 teeth to the thickness of that. In addition, I want to lubricate my blade. Now there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. Some people will run that lubrication up along the back side of their blade. Some people will drag down. I actually do the front of my blade, but I drag upwards. And this way I don't totally fill all of my teeth with my lubricant. Now in addition to that, my teeth are pointing out, but they're also pointing down so that when I come down on the downstroke, it will cut. The next thing I need to do is start cutting my rings. So however you're going to support this, you want to get it nice and comfortable, holding things tight, and you are going to be cutting at an angle where you actually cut through more than one ring at a time. However, it's going to be at an angle, so only one ring will cut completely through at a time. So what I'm going to do, I like to work my blade up just a little bit to kind of get it into position, and then I'm just going to let that saw blade do all of the work for me. I do nothing but hold the ring and the saw blade, moving it back and forth, back and forth. And now I'm starting to work into the second ring, but I'm not yet through the first one. And there's that first little bit. Move him out of our way. And I can see that that cut for that next one is perfectly in line with that line that I have created. There's my next string, and you can see we have a beautiful oval profile to that, and that is exactly what I want to see. Now I'm going to continue to do this for the rest of my coil, and we'll go to that point. Now the question comes up on this particular one, is there another way that I can cut these rings other than just using a saw frame or the jeweler's saw? Not really. We are working with such a thick material, and again we're cutting kind of on that spine of those jump rings that to cut this with a jump ring making system just really is not a great idea. Most of them don't cut through material this thick to begin with, and also with the added difficulty of getting it to stay up on its spine would make it so that it's not the best candidate for that. So really just get to know your saw. And again, this comes back to using those skills and learning that particular skill set. So the next thing we need to do now is to open up our jump rings. There is a proper way to open these and a proper way to close them. And if you don't do it right, you are not going to be happy with your results. So you can see that we've got these great oval links. I'm very, very excited and happy to see how well everything turned out. It's nice and uniform. I'm going to use 2 pairs of pliers. One pair is a chain nose and one pair is a flat nose. Now you could do 2 chain nose and 2 flat nose if you really wanted to. It just depends on what you have. I happen to have one of each, so that is what I'm going to use. So my right hand happens to be the chain nose pliers, and what I'm going to do is insert my ring in here so that a lot of that surface area is held inside of these pliers. The next pair is, and I'm going to support this here in my bench pin just so that I'm not all out here trying to do this. So you're going to support this pair into your bench pin. The next pair of pliers is going to come in from the opposite side, and it's perpendicular. So one is vertical, one is horizontal. And what I'm going to do is grip both of these. Now notice again, I have a lot of this ring area completely covered with these pliers. And I'm going to hold very tightly and give a nice little twist so that it twists open. And what that's going to do is keep that oval shape of my ring and allow me to put my rings into here and then close it back up nice and tight, but yet keep that oval shape. So I want to do that for each of my rings. So again, I'm going to support here on my bench pin, come back in from this direction, and open that ring up as well. And I want to do that for all of the rings in my chain. Now is the time to take care of any of the burrs that might have been created while you were doing the sawing of these rings, and you want to do that with kind of a fine needle file. Now the burrs that have been created on these rings are not that bad. I have a couple that have a few that might need to be addressed. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this ring, I'm going to stabilize here along my bench pin, and ever so slightly I want to just kind of hit that area with the file. It shouldn't take a whole lot. Those burrs that are created with the jeweler's saw are not that big. And if you've done your sawing properly, the faces on both sides of this ring should be nice and flat. And so when we go to close them up, they should be really good. Okay, pretty happy with that. Now that's as far as we are going to take this project in this video. In the next video, I will show you how to assemble your ring and solder them closed. There's a little different technique that Alan uses than what I have ever learned in the past, so I want to point out a few nuances there as well. After we assemble our chain, then it's really time to put it to the test as we begin to do the twist, and we will then mount it onto a board, file in our facets, and finish it up. I will see you guys all next week. Thanks so much for joining me.